Let me take you back to 1995 for a little recap. During Bach's final months in Skid Row on the Subhuman Beings on Tour as it was called, Skid Row was on the way down in popularity, not the way up. The landscape of music at that time had changed dramatically. While Skid Row had managed to survive the trends of the early 90s, grunge, thrash, pop, rap and dance music on the back of their #1 album Slave to the Grind, the minute this album dropped by Oasis, it was all over. The whole Britpop craze was about to make Oasis the biggest rock band on the planet. The time of hair metal and hard rock bands was long since over, and in an effort to stay current, Skid Row swapped genres and released a heavy alternative album, and a damn good one at that. It got mostly positive reviews, and one song ended up in a movie called The Prophecy. Despite this though, the damage was done. Subhuman Race was released on March 28, 1995, but the band was in decline by this point. Bach's voice had deteriorated from switching his singing styles to singing and screaming from his throat, and by the time the year was out, it's clear that it had done some damage to his voice. The fans had declined, and the tension between the members of the band and Bach had reached breaking point, and the cracks were beginning to show. They all looked exhausted. On top of that, Bach's father was diagnosed with leukemia and bone marrow cancer. Bach was shouldering the burden of both his dying father and the band, all while being alienated from the rest of the group in a time of great unknowns. What's the Story Morning Glory by Oasis drops on October 2nd, 1995, completely and utterly annihilating every rock band in sales and cementing Britpop as the new dominant rock genre. Hair metal and hard rock bands were from this point on old news. While Britpop isn't really considered a part of the rock or metal scene, like it or not, Oasis were a rock band and arguably the biggest at the time, at least in my neck of the woods. Second to none other than Blur. Depending on who you ask, it was a whole thing back then. Which do you prefer, Blur or Oasis? The same debate was being had over Boyzone and Take That. If that wasn't bad enough, the Spice Girls were only a year away from dropping their first album, Spice, and becoming the most popular girl group on the planet. This was not a good time for any band, let alone Skid Row. That's a heavy burden to carry as the lead singer of a band of their type in the 90s. How was Skid Row supposed to compete with the likes of that kind of stardom, especially when they couldn't even get their own shit together? The last concert Skid Row played was at the Monsters of Rock in Brazil on August 17, 1996, where they gave a less than stellar performance to an angry mob of pissed off metalheads that couldn't wait for them to get off the stage. They got booed and had a various barrage of missiles thrown at them like bottles of piss, rocks and spit. It's clear to see they were completely exhausted and out of shape as a band. Their set was an absolute shit show. After this, Skid Row decided to take a couple of months off the road. The band completely isolated themselves from Bach, ignoring his calls to hang out and rehearse and so on. A few months into their break, Skid Row was offered the opening slot on the Psycho Circus Kiss reunion tour. Bach wanted to accept the offer, but Rachel Bolan turned it down as he was touring with his own band. Enraged by this and the continued isolation, Bach left an angry message on Snake's answering machine expressing his frustrations, and soon after this was kicked out of Skid Row. By 1997, Bach was left high and dry, having to start all over again. His dismissal from Skid Row was a huge loss for Sebastian, and he understandably took it pretty bad. He was depressed and overwhelmed with stress and worry and unsure of what the future would hold for him and his family. After giving the best years of his life to Skid Row, he was unsure of how to move forward and how he could support his family. He felt a tremendous amount of guilt for letting down his fans as well. And when you're part of something like Skid Row and it's suddenly taken away from you, it can be as bad as breaking up with a girl. You go through the same range of emotions and that can be hard to take. But he wasn't sitting around for long. Skid Row may have ditched Sebastian, but in a strange turn of events, Skid Row's booking agency that operated for Skid Row, Premier Talent, dropped Skid Row and kept Sebastian and got him back to work. McGee Entertainment no longer wanted to work with Sebastian, so he wouldn't have to pay them a cut for any money he would have made from future tours. But just like Skid Row, it was back to playing clubs for a while. Sebastian would eventually be asked to join a supergroup called The Last Hard Men, the goal of which was to see if the worlds of hard rock and alternative music could merge and create something great. We had Sebastian on lead vocals, Jimmy Fleming from the Frogs on vocals, guitar, bass and piano, Kelly Deal from the Breeders on vocals, guitar and bass, and Jimmy Chamberlain from the Smashing Pumpkins on drums. It was quite an odd mix with everyone doing a little bit of everything, but it was a band, so Sebastian took the gig. They produced one album funded in its entirety by Bach, and it's pretty unique. It's not my cup of tea, it's extremely random, but it was an attempt at something new. There's one absolute belter of a song in the album called The Most Powerful Man in the World. Simply put, it's beautiful, and it's again another example of Sebastian's amazing voice. From what I can tell, the Last Hard Men doubled as Sebastian's band for his solo career. They also doubled as the Frogs when it suited. The Last Hard Men had an interesting wardrobe choice for a band in the late 90s. They had this bizarre 70s glam superhero costume look to them. It didn't really make much sense, but this band didn't really make much sense, but damn were they good live. Sebastian was back and he was fired up in the clubs, giving absolute stellar performances, full of piss and vinegar, injecting life back into stage performances. He was singing and performing as if he was in a stadium. His vocals had appeared to improve immensely as well. You could tell he was hungry to climb back up the ladder. The Last Hard Men's self-titled album was released in 1998 in a limited quantity as the label had decided not to support it. It was also re-released with some extras in 2002. The album reached number 22 on the Japanese top 50 album charts in 2002 when it was re-released, and in my opinion that's a respectable position for what essentially was an unknown mixed bag of a band. The Last Hard Men also appeared in a movie called Final Rinse in 1999, the trailer of which looks hilarious. I was laughing my head off when I found it. It appears to be the best movie I've never seen. The plot seems to be about a detective hunting a murderer that's killing people in the rock scene, and get this, he's stealing their hair. There doesn't appear to be any download or stream for the movie, but it's definitely on my watch list. I'll be ordering the DVD as soon as I can. Sebastian would continue touring with the Last Hard Men and the club circuit until one night Vinnie Paul came to a show. He got on stage for a jam, then told the crowd that night that he was taken back out with Pantera on their arena tour, returning the favour for giving Pantera their first arena tour. This put Sebastian back in arenas and in front of huge audiences, second on the bill with the now kings of thrash metal, helping to sustain his name in the business of rock and roll. Next up was his first solo album, Bring 'Em Back Alive. It was released in 1999. It's mostly a live album with a few originals. It was co-produced by Michael Wagner and Sebastian and recorded in a number of different studios, including the very famous Electric Lady Studios. Bring 'Em Back Alive peaked at 95 on the Japanese charts. The songs that are on the album are okay, but the album lacks the polish of his previous work, most likely in a move to stay current, but it's still a pretty good album. In 2002 he released Back to Basics, an all-covers album which had Rob Affuso on drums for one of the tracks. It was an independent release that ran for a limited time from his website. By the time the decade was out, Sebastian had appeared in 2 movies, but the best roles of his career were yet to come. He first got the role of Jekyll and Hyde in the Broadway musical of the same name in 2000. Bach fell in love with the role as he felt the story somewhat mirrored what was happening to him in his real life. Sebastian was the first legit rock star to perform and play a leading role on Broadway. In preparation for this role, Sebastian went about completely restoring his voice to its original clarity with the help of the singing coach for the play, Jason Holon. Once again, Sebastian could sing with flawless clarity and perfect vibrato. Theatre performance was a new and unknown step in Sebastian's career. Singing with only a partial microphone, Sebastian had to project his voice naturally to reach everyone in the theatre, whilst not breaking character. His performance of This Is the Moment moved me like no other songs have done for me in his career.
This is the moment, this is the day, when I send all my doubts and demons on their way. Every endeavor I am in ever is coming into play, is here and now today. This is the moment, my final test. Destiny beckons, I never recognize.
His command of the stage, his clarity, his ability to convey such emotion, it just draws you in and makes you want more of this type of performance. Because of his role on Broadway, Sebastian was back in the mainstream, appearing on shows like Conan O'Brien, Live with Regis and Kathy Lee, MTV All-Stars and an episode of MTV Cribs. Pretty soon he became a household name again on the backing of VH1, which gave him his own reality TV show Forever Wild in 2002. The show was basically like Headbangers Ball with special guests of his choice. Sebastian had successfully regained his relevancy in the public eye, which led to more Broadway shows and appearances, and even bigger roles in TV shows. He then got the leading role in Jesus Christ Superstar in 2002, but was let go the following year due to irreconcilable differences. From that point on, he became a recurring character on the Gilmore Girls, playing the role of Gil, a guitar player for the fictional band in the show, once again exposing him to a worldwide audience and keeping him relevant. While Skid Row had been forgotten, Sebastian was thriving thanks to his new career as a Broadway and television actor. But this was only the beginning in the rise of Sebastian Bach.